Margaret sat on her porch, a cup of tea resting between her palms. The late afternoon sun was slipping behind the trees, casting long streaks of amber light across the grass. The air was still, and the quiet of her Vermont neighborhood felt heavier than usual. More present, somehow, ever since her husband had passed 8 years ago. The hush inside her home had become something she tolerated, though it never quite felt like peace. Her days were calm, familiar, and steady, until the sudden buzz of her phone against the armrest startled her. Margaret rarely paid much attention to her phone. It was mostly a line for her daughter's calls or a holiday greeting from an old friend who still remembered to check in. But when she lifted it, she saw the name Ethan flashing on the screen. Her grandson. Ethan was 25 now, living in Boston. Ambitious, busy, full of energy that always made her both proud and a little nostalgic. He loved to send her brief texts about his work, his friends, the rush of city life that felt worlds away from her quiet routines. But this message was different. "Grandma, please come to the city this weekend. There's someone I want you to meet. Trust me, this will change everything." Margaret read it once, twice, then a third time, her brow creasing. Someone he wanted her to meet? What could possibly be so important? She pressed a hand gently to her chest, feeling her pulse quicken in an unfamiliar way. Ethan had always been thoughtful, but there was something in his words, a gravity she couldn't quite place. She set the phone aside and lifted her cup again. But the tea had cooled, and its warmth no longer comforted her. The phrase echoed in her thoughts, steady and strange. This will change everything. Change. It was a word she hadn't entertained in years. Her life had settled into quiet repetition. Wake early, tend to the garden, read by the fire, then sleep. It was a rhythm that kept the past in its place, and the days from asking too much of her. But Ethan's message had stirred something deep and unsteady, something that refused to be ignored. That night, Margaret found herself sitting at the kitchen table with her suitcase open before her. It looked oddly foreign there, the zipper stiff from disuse. She hesitated over every choice. A soft scarf she hadn't worn in years. The pale blue dress her daughter once said made her look lovely. A pair of shoes that had gone untouched for too long because she'd had nowhere to wear them. Each item she folded carried a whisper of memory. Her fingers trembled as she worked, unsure whether it was excitement or fear that made them shake. The following morning, she boarded the train bound for Boston. The whistle's cry pierced the crisp air, and as the wheels screeched into motion, Margaret felt her quiet world recede behind her. The countryside rushed by in a blur of color. Gold fields, dark pines, silver streams. But her mind was elsewhere. She tried to read, yet her eyes drifted again and again to the window, chasing her own reflection. Ethan's words circled through her mind like a tune she couldn't silence. "This will change everything." She whispered them under her breath, tasting both wonder and unease in the promise they carried. When the skyline of Boston finally rose ahead, its towers catching the afternoon light, Margaret's heart lifted and tightened all at once. On the platform, Ethan stood waiting, waving with the same bright enthusiasm he'd had as a child. She smiled despite the nerves fluttering inside her. She hadn't seen him in months, but his energy, his warmth, wrapped around her the moment he reached her. He pulled her into a hug, firm and full, as if that single embrace held something unspoken, something heavy. "You made it," he said, grinning. "Of course I did," she replied, though her voice trembled. "But Ethan, what is all this about? You sound like you're hiding something." He laughed, light but secretive. "I can't tell you yet. You'll see tomorrow night. For now, just trust me." Margaret frowned, but didn't push further. Ethan's eyes sparkled with a mix of mischief and sincerity. It was the same look he had as a child when he had planned surprises for her, a hand-drawn card, a flower picked from the yard, or a story he had written just for her, except now that look felt different, older, more serious. Back at his apartment, she sat by the window while he busied himself in the kitchen making tea. Her eyes wandered across the city, lights flickering in the distance. The hum of cars, the chatter of people on the sidewalks, the endless energy of Thessaly, all of it reminded her how far she'd drifted into her quiet, sheltered world. Ethan placed a cup in front of her. "You're going to love tomorrow, Grandma. I promise. She studied his face, searching for clues. Is it about work, or are you introducing me to someone special in your life? He smiled softly, shaking his head. Not exactly. It's for you, for me? The question slipped out before she could stop herself. What do you mean? You'll understand, he said, his voice gentle. It's almost protective. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her fingers gripping the warm cup. Her mind spun with questions, none of which had answers. For her, what could he possibly have planned for her? She was 70 years old, her days of surprises, of life-changing moments she believed were long behind her. And yet, Ethan's confidence unsettled her. It was as if he knew something about her life. She deemed single quotes till later that evening. As she prepared for bed in the guest room, Ethan slipped her a small envelope. Don't open it until tomorrow, he said with a grin. It'll make more sense then. She held the envelope in her hand long after he left the room. It felt heavier than paper should, as though it carried not just words, but memories waiting to be uncovered. She placed it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and lay in bed, staring into the dark. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the message on her phone, heard Ethan's voice, and felt the envelope pressing against her palm. Somewhere deep inside, Margaret knew this wasn't just a visit. This wasn't just a weekend trip to see her grandson. Something was waiting for her in this city, something she had not prepared for, something Ethan believed she needed. She turned to face the window where the city lights glowed against the night sky and whispered into the quiet room. What could you possibly have in store for me, Ethan? Her heart, so long accustomed to stillness, beat a little faster as she drifted in Taurusless dreams. Margaret woke to the sound of the city outside the window. Cars hummed down the street, horns echoed faintly, and voices drifted up from the sidewalks below. She sat up slowly, remembering where she was, Watson's apartment in Boston. For a moment, she wondered if yesterday's events had been a dream, but then Harry's fell on the envelope on the nightstand. Her heart skipped. She had almost forgotten it. Ethan's instructions came back clearly. Don't open it until tomorrow. She picked it up, feeling the weight of it in her hand. For a second, she thought about tearing it open right away, but something stopped her. Maybe fear. Maybe the strange sense that whatever was inside was going to stir her world in ways she wasn't ready for. She placed it back down and walked to the kitchen. Ethan was already there, frying eggs, humming to himself. He turned with a smile. Morning, Grandma. Sleep okay, Margaret nodded, though it wasn't the truth. Her night had been restless, full of half-formed dreams and questions without answers. Over breakfast, Ethan kept the conversation light. He talked about work, about a friend who had just gotten engaged, about the new bookstore that opened near his office. Margaret listened, smiled when he looked her way, but her mind stayed fixed on that envelope. She wanted to ask him what it meant, but she knew he wouldn't tell her. His secretive grin said everything by afternoon. Ethan suggested a walk. The crisp bottom air greeted them as they stepped outside. The streets were busy, lined with trees already shedding their golden leaves. Margaret breathed in the city's energy. It felt alive in a way. Her quiet town never did. Where are we going? She asked, trying not to sound impatient. Nowhere in particular, Ethan replied, his hands in his pockets. I just wanted you to see the city again. It's been too long. They walked past coffee shops with couples laughing at outdoor tables, bookshops with tall glass windows, and little flower stands bright with color. Margaret tried to enjoy it, but her curiosity nodded at her. She felt like a killed again, following breadcrumbs without knowing where the trail would end. Finally, Ethan stopped at a park bench. The trees above them swayed gently, scattering red and orange leaves onto the path. He gestured for her to sit. Grandma, he said, more serious now. I know this weekend might feel confusing, but I want you to trust me. Tonight will explain everything. Margaret studied his face. There was no joke hiding in his tone, no mischief in his eyes this time, only determination. She leaned closer. Ethan, you're making me nervous. Who is it you want me to meet? Why keep me guessing like this? He hesitated, then smiled softly. Because sometimes surprises are worth the wait. She sighed, frustrated, but unwilling to push further. Ethan was stubborn when he wanted to be, just like his mother had been. She knew she wouldn't get anything out of him until he was ready. They returned to the apartment in the late afternoon. Margaret went to her room to rest. The envelope caught her eye again. This time, she didn't resist. With trembling fingers, she slid her thumb under the flap and pulled out a single piece of paper. Her breath caught as she read the name written at the top. Daniel Carter. Other vision blurred for a moment. She sat down on the edge of the bed, the paper shaking in her hand. Daniel, she whispered the name aloud, tasting the memory of it. Daniel had been her first love. She was only 19 when she met him at a summer festival. He had been tall, handsome, with a laugh that made people turn their heads. They spent a few magical years together, filled with youthful promises and whispered dreams. She had thought he was the one she would marry. But life had changed everything. He had been offered a job out west, while her family needed her back home. Letters were written at first, long and full of hope, but distance wore them thin. Eventually, silence replaced the words, and Margaret's life took another path. A path that led her to her late husband, to motherhood, to the family she had now. She had not spoken Daniel's name in decades. Yet, here it was written plainly on the page in her hands. Margaret's pulse raced. Was it possible that Ethan meant that Daniel? But how could he know? She had never shared that story with him. It was a memory she had locked away, too tender to touch. She set the paper down, pressing her fingers to her temples. The questions came too fast to catch. Why was Ethan giving her this? Could Daniel still be alive? Still here? And if so, why now? Dinner was quiet. Ethan kept glancing at her as if waiting for her to speak, but Margaret couldn't form the words. The name still burned in her mind. She wanted to ask, but fear kept her silent as the evening turned to night. Ethan finally said, "Grandma, I know you opened it." Margaret froze, her fork halfway to her plate. I did, and he asked gently. Her voice shook. "Ethan, how do you know that name? How do you know Daniel Carter?" Ethan's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Because I found him." The room went still. Margaret's heart thudded so loudly she could barely hear her own voice. "You found him," Ethan nodded. "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just trust me. You'll see." Margaret stared at him, torn between shock, fear, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope. That night she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts spun wildly. Daniel Carter, the boy she had once loved with all her heart. The boy who had slipped away into the past. If Ethan was telling the truth, if he had really found him, what would it mean for her life now? The city outside whispered with energy, and Margaret realized she was trembling. She'd come here for a simple visit with her grandson. Instead, she had stepped into the middle of a story she thought was long over, and tomorrow, she would find out if the past was about to open its doors again. Margaret could barely hold her fork steady at breakfast the next morning. Her hands trembled with each sip of coffee, and her eyes kept darting toward Ethan, searching for answers he refused to give. He seemed calm, cheerful, even, as though nothing unusual was happening. But Margaret's mind was in chaos. Daniel Carter. The name echoed in her head like a drumbeat. When Ethan announced, "We're going out tonight," Margaret nearly dropped her cup. "Out? Where?" she asked, her voice tighter than she wanted it to sound. He only smiled. "You'll see. Just be ready by 6. Where's something you feel good in?" Margaret tried to argue, but he stood, kissed her on the cheek, and left for work, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat in silence for nearly an hour, the name still burning in her mind. Could it truly be him? After all these years, a man she hadn't seen since she was barely more than a girl. By the time the afternoon sun slid across the sky, Margaret finally opened her suitcase. She pulled out the pale blue dress she had almost left behind. Her fingers smoothed the fabric, and for a moment she saw herself at 19 again, young, in love and full of dreams she thought would last forever. She pressed the dress against her chest and whispered, "What if it's really him?" At exactly 6, Ethan appeared at their door, dressed neatly, his smile gentle. "You look beautiful." "Grandma." Her cheeks warmed as she shook her head. "I look like an old woman in her Sunday best." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You look like someone about to start a new chapter." Those words silenced her. She followed him downstairs, her heart pounding harder with every step. The taxi ride felt endless. Margaret stared out the window as the city lights flickered past, her mind racing. She wanted to demand answers to beg Ethan to tell her everything, but something inside held her back. A strange mix of fear and anticipation kept her quiet. Finally, the taxi stopped in front of a quiet restaurant tucked between tall buildings. Its windows glowed warmly, and the faint sound of piano music drifted through the door as they entered. Ethan guided her through the softly lit room, past couples whispering to each other over wine glasses, past waiters carrying trays of steaming plates. Margaret's breath caught as he stopped near the far window. Her eyes landed on a man standing there. He turned and time seemed to stop. It was him, Daniel, older. Yes. His hair was now silver, his shoulders broader, his face lined with the years they had both lived apart. But his eyes, those same deep blue eyes she had fallen into when she was young, had not changed. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice low, almost breaking. Her throat tightened and tears blurred her vision. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. For decades she'd imagined what it would be like if they met again, but never once had she believed it would truly happen. Ethan Chan squeezed hers gently. "I'll give you two some time." He stepped back, leaving her face to face with the man she had once thought she'd spend forever with. Daniel took a step forward. Heist's expression carried both joy and hesitation, as though he feared she might vanish if he reached for her. I never thought I'd see you again." Margaret swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I don't understand. How are you here?" How she stopped turning toward Ethan, but her grandson had already walked toward the back of the restaurant. This was no mistake. He had planned it all. Daniel's smile was soft, touched with sadness. "Your grandson reached out to me, said it was time we met again." Her heart nearly stopped. "Ethan found you," Daniel nodded. "He told me about you, about how you've been since Thomas passed." Margaret, when I saw his message, I couldn't believe it. After all these years, after all the distance, I thought this chance was gone forever. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. The room spun with emotion, memories flooding back so fast she could barely breathe. The summer festivals, the letters they had written, the promises whispered under the stars, and the heartbreak of letting him go, of watching her life take a different path. They sat across from each other, relatable between them both a barrier and a bridge. For a moment silence stretched, heavy with all the words unsaid. Finally Margaret spoke. "I don't know what to say then." "Don't," Daniel replied gently. "Just let me sit here with you. After all these years, this is enough." But it wasn't enough. Her heart ached with questions. Where had he been all this time? Had he thought of her as she'd thought of him? Did he still carry pieces of their past the way she did, tucked away like pressed flowers in an old book? The waiter brought wine, but neither touched it. Instead, they talked slowly at first, cautiously, like strangers relearning each other. Daniel told her of his years working in California, the family he had built and lost, the moves he had made. Margaret shared pieces of her own story, though she kept some details quiet, unsure if her voice could carry the weight of them. The hours slipped by. The restaurant emptied, the piano grew softer and still. They remained, their voices growing warmer, freer. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then fuller, brighter, as though time itself was bending to give them back what had been lost. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Margaret, I know it's been a lifetime. I don't expect anything from you, but seeing you again, it feels like a gift I never thought I'd have." Her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to speak to tell him everything she was feeling, but the words tangled in her throat. All she could do was nod, her heart pounding so loudly. She feared he might hear it as they stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights glittered around them. Ethan stood a little distance away, watching quietly, his face calm, almost proud. Margaret realized then that this was his surprise. He had given her something no one else could have a second chance at a story she thought was long over. She glanced at Daniel, their yes meeting under the glow of a street lamp. And in that moment, Margaret knew the truth. Her world had just shifted. This wasn't just a dinner. This was the beginning of something new. The night after meeting Daniel, Margaret lay awake in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Every moment of their dinner replayed in her mind his voice, his smile, the way his eyes softened when they looked at her. She had waited decades for such amament. Yet now that it had come, she didn't know what to do with it. Her heart was filled with joy and fear all at once. When morning light slipped through the curtains, Ethan was already at her door. "Grandma," he said softly. "Daniel asked if he could see you again today." Margaret froze, clutching the blanket. So soon, Ethan smiled knowingly. You've waited a lifetime. Don't hide now. Her chest tightened. She wanted to say no to protect herself from the storm of feelings threatening to overwhelm her, but something inside whispered that if she turned away now, she might never get another chance. So she nodded. Tell him yes. By afternoon, Daniel was waiting for her outside the hotel, standing tall with a small bouquet of flowers in his hand. When she stepped out, he offered them with a nervous grin. For you? I wasn't sure what you liked anymore. Margaret laughed, a sound that surprised even her. I like that you remembered to bring flowers at all. They spent the day walking through the city. They strolled past the harbor where gulls circled overhead and waves shimmered in the sun. They visited a park filled with children playing, their laughter carrying in the breeze. At every step, Daniel told her little stories about the places he had lived, the travels he had made, the dreams he had chased. Margaret listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes aching, realizing how much life they had lived apart. At one point, they sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree. Silence fell between them, heavy but comfortable. Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. Margaret, I need to tell you something. I don't want to waste time. We've already lost too many years. Her heart pounded. What is it? He took a deep breath. I never stopped thinking about you, even after we went our separate ways. Even when life carried me far away, you were always there like a part of me. I couldn't let go. I don't expect anything from you now, but I need you to know the truth. Margaret's eyes blurred with tears. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his. Daniel, I thought of you too, more times than I can count. But I had a life, a family, responsibilities. I couldn't turn back. I know, he whispered, and I respect that. But know where we are. Older, maybe wiser, but still us. Don't you think fate has given us another chance? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret's breath shook as she answered. Maybe it has, but what do we do with it? Daniel smiled, a warmth in his eyes that reached deep inside her. We live. We don't waste another day hiding from it. For the first time in years, Margaret felt her heart lift, not with a careless hope of youth, but with the deep, steady flame of someone who had learned what loss meant and what it meant to find something again. That evening, Ethan joined them for dinner. He watched quietly as Margaret and Daniel talked, his expression filled with quiet pride. At one point, Margaret turned to him and asked, You planned this, didn't you? You knew what this would mean. Ethan smiled gently. I just wanted you to be happy, Grandma. You've done everything for me. It was time someone did something for you. Margaret reached across the table, squeezing his hand with tears in her eyes. You gave me back something I thought was gone forever. I can never thank you enough. Over the next few days, Margaret and Daniel spent nearly every moment together. They visited museums, sat in quiet cafes, and walked along the beach at sunset. Each conversation uncovered pieces of the past and dreams for the future. It was as if the years between them were melting away, leaving only the bond that had never truly broken. One evening, as they stood watching the waves crash against the shore, Daniel turned to her. His voice was low but steady. Margaret, I don't know how much time life has left for us, but whatever it is, I want to spend it with you. Not as a memory, not as a ghost of the past, but as someone real here now. Will you let me? Margaret felt her throat tighten. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, the life she'd built, the family she had raised. She thought of all the love she had given and received. And then she looked at Daniel, standing there with hope in his eyes, offering her something she never imagined she could have again. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, Daniel, I will. He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time in decades, Margaret felt the same warmth she had once known in her youth. Not the same love as before, but something deeper love reborn through time. Tested by distance, made stronger by survival. Ethan watched from a distance, smiling softly. He had given her this gift, but it was Margaret who had chosen to embrace it. And in that moment, he knew he had done the right thing. As the days turned into weeks, Margaret and Daniel began building something new. They spoke of traveling together, of visiting places they had once dreamed of seeing. They talked about family, about cherishing every day, about laughter and companionship. Their story was no longer one of missed chances, but of second chances embraced. On their last evening before Margaret was due to return home, the three of them sat together in the hotel lounge. Ethan raised his glass of sparkling water and said, 2 new beginnings. Margaret and Daniel clinked their glasses against his, their eyes shining. To new beginnings, Margaret echoed. That night, as she packed her suitcase, Margaret felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She was no longer haunted by the past. Instead, she was carrying it with her, woven into the present, shaping the future. And as she closed her suitcase, she whispered softly to herself, "It's never too late for love."